It's still up. No, it ain't.
It's the wonder of nature, baby!
Yes, we'll reel around the flag, boys will relive once again, shouting a battle cry of freedom. We will relive from the hillside, all together from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors, up with the stars. We will reel around the flag, boys, and relive once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday night sports special installment of Uncut History.
We are spring.
Stop the intro somehow. You know, one day I'll become a master of the editing department. I was about to say editoring. Well, we were supposed to be doing the stream last week. However, my throat decided to give out on me, at least in terms of the communication part of making noises that apparently come out as the English language. So was not able to stream Thursday. Voice is far better this week. We're still not 100%. So there may very likely be a point in tonight's stream and Thursday's stream where I just spontaneously combust into a coughing fit, and you'll get to see more of that wonderful intro as I go and try to calm my very, very parched throat. But until that moment happens, welcome to Uncut History. We are wrapping up our coverage of the Overland Campaign 160 years after it occurred through Virginia during the American Civil War. Ghost of Howard's right arm is already tuning in from Eastern Adams County. Thank you for tuning in. I know this is an awkward day and an awkward time to be streaming live on Readout Productions, but there's a reason for it. I'll talk more about that when we get to the end of the stream, why we're doing this tonight, other than I just want to make up for lost time. Well, where did we leave off? Let's go to the slideshow. Let's see where do we leave off with Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant and their little tussle happening in Virginia in the spring of 1864. Well, this is going to be the final stream relating to the Overland Campaign, so let's kind of wrap it all up, what we've talked to up to this point. For those that are tuning in, this is the first time you're tuning in to our Overland coverage. Welcome. Let's get you up to speed. In the spring of 1864, the Union Army are going to get a new commander of all forces, and that's going to be Ulysses S. Grant. Grant decides to move his headquarters to the Eastern Theater, moving out of the Western Theater, where he got a lot of his earlier experience in the conflict against the Confederate States of America, who seceded from the United States of America in spring of 1861. 1864 is an election year in the United States of America, and the Lincoln administration, the very, very controversial administration, whose election kind of spurred on the secession in the southern states over the dispute of slavery and other conundrums between the varying United States. The Lincoln administration, it's uncertain if they're actually going to remain in office through 1864, so they want to find a quick end to the American Civil War, force the Confederate States back into the Union. Lincoln pins another star on Grant's shoulders, and Grant attaches himself to the Army of the Potomac, the Union's main fighting force, in dealing with the main Confederate fighting force in the East, the Army of Northern Virginia. And the Army of Northern Virginia really is the one shining light for the hopes that the Confederate States can remain independent in the long run. In the Western Theater, the Confederacy has not been doing so good, in large part due to Grant's tactics. But Robert E. Lee has constantly been able to seemingly outwit and pin down previous Union commanders, one commander after another, each one trying to gun it for Richmond. Robert E. Lee has always seemingly found a way to defeat them. However, Robert E. Lee's army, they're not as strong as they feel they are, though they are quite confident in their abilities after their defeat at Gettysburg. They're pretty badly shaken up in terms of their numerical strength. And some of the valuable leadership that the army had at the start of the war is either gravely ill, wounded, or no longer living on this earth. So in any case, Grant is going to motivate the Army of the Potomac to drive toward Richmond once again. And while it'd be very nice to march into the Confederate capital, capture it, and hopefully bring a quick end to the war at long last, Grant has a primary objective. He has an ulterior objective that is not necessarily capturing something. It's rather he wants to tie down the Army of Northern Virginia as much as possible, as long as possible, and bleed it for all it's worth. If he destroys the Army of North Virginia, no longer makes it an effective fighting force, the one hope that the Confederacy has at independence is going to evaporate. Well, Lee and Grant are first going to engage each other in the Wilderness, a treacherous piece of new growth forest just west of Fredericksburg, Virginia. Grant was hoping to move through it quickly, outflank Lee, and force Lee to attack him on ground of Grant's choosing. That did not happen. Lee caught on to what Grant was doing, moved into the Wilderness, and tied down the Union Army in a brutal 2-day engagement. Any previous commander would have likely had enough of the taste of blood after those 2 days and abandoned their attack and moved back across the Rappahannock River, which had happened multiple times before in the war. Grant continues the offensive, which boosts the morale of the Union soldiers under his command. Now, Grant was hoping to make a beeline out of the Wilderness once more, try to outflank Lee. However, due to having this whole massive Union army try to move down these narrow roads, they kind of cause a bottleneck. And there's also some arguments between the commander of the Army of Potomac, I should say, which is George Gordon Meade. While Grant is the overall boss of Union forces, Meade is still the technical commander of the Army of Potomac. Meade gets into some squabbles with the new commander of the Cavalry Corps in the Eastern Theater, that being Philip Sheridan. And Sheridan decides to go off and raid Richmond, depriving Meade of eyes and ears, a vanguard for his army. And Meade is unable to get possession of a critical crossroads around Spotsylvania Courthouse. The Confederates move in and dig in around these crossroads, blocking the Union advance once more. And for the next 2 weeks, the two armies slug it out in brutal trench warfare around Spotsylvania Courthouse, which also becomes the third bloodiest battle of the American Civil War. Unable to penetrate the Confederate line at Spotsylvania, Grant decides to move east and then south, making a rush for the North Anna River, hoping they can cross it and using the railroad right-of-way as a straight shot into the Confederate capital. Lee, however, is once more going to be able to get in front of Meade and take a very good defensive ground on the south side of the North Anna River. And Lee, although gravely ill, commanding his army from a sick bed, has what would later be considered the greatest defensive land that he has ever been given during the war. He puts his army in an inverted V, which is going to force the Union to divide and send out their forces piecemeal. Lee is hoping that he'll be able to pull Grant into a trap and get into a situation where he can completely surround and destroy a vital portion of the Army of the Potomac. Grant, however, quickly realizes, not a good idea to hit those high grounds. He pulls the Union Army back across. Hold on one moment. We will be right back, folks.
It's the wonder of nature, baby!
Yes, we're reeling around the flag. once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. We will relive from the hillside while together from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors, up with the stars. We will reel around the flag, boys, and relay once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Springing to the goal of your brothers born before, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And we'll begin from the ranks with a million free more, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors, up with the stars. We will relay from the flag, boys, and relay once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. To the lair true and brave, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And all of them poor, not the man who shall be slave, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors, up with the stars. We will rail around the flag, boys, and relay once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. From the east and from the west, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And we heard the rebel crow from the land we do the best, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor.
It's the wonder of nature, baby!
All right, I'm back. Well, this is actually Stonewall Jackson. Sorry about that, guys. I just had a phone call, had to pick that up. That was important. Where were we? I was trying to recap something about the Overland Campaign. Oh, thanks for that. Wonderful. Yes. Mm-hmm. I am Claw, destroyer of Uranus. I wonder if the cat finally got him. Yeah, well, which one? I mean, the evil one is prowling around somewhere. Okay, back to the story. Okay, so Grant made commander of all Union forces, wants to tie down Robert E. Lee, bleed the Confederate Army thin, deprive the Confederacy of its one major hope, which is the success of the Army of North Virginia. However, the two commanders meet stalemate in the wilderness, stalemate of Spotsylvania, stalemate in North Anna. And once more, Grant moves east and south across the Pamunkey River and is now going to try to push across the new Confederate battle line, which stretches on the south side of Totopotomoy Creek. However, in late May, as Grant is trying to test the Totopotomoy Creek Confederate line, he sees another opportunity to the southeast. A crossroads, which will be the last major crossroads before the last major river crossing into Richmond, that being the Chickahominy River. If he can get possession of those crossroads, perhaps he can finally do what he's been sent out to do since the start of this campaign, outflank Lee and find battleground of his choosing to force Lee to assault him on. Again, there's only at this point in the campaign in late May, Robert E. Lee only has one major river left to put between himself and the Union, and that's being the Chickahominy River, which is just north of Richmond. So right now, the two battle lines in late May of 1864 are right on Richmond's outskirts. This is the closest that the Union have gotten to getting into Richmond since 1862 during the failed Peninsula Campaign, which was a very, very costly campaign for the Union, not just in lives, but in just sheer resources. It was an amphibious landing. So imagine, 2 days from now, we'll be commemorating the 80th anniversary of D-Day. There's a massive landing of troops on the French coastline. Well, imagine trying to do something similar, albeit on a smaller scale, with 19th century technology. That's what the Union tried to do to take Richmond. It didn't work out too well for them. You're going to eat ice cream now. What type of ice cream? You could have some Rocky Road. I like Rocky Road ice cream. That's always good. Oreos and cream's good too. Now, what's interesting is up to this point in our Overland Campaign coverage, I've been bringing up the fact that Grant is able to get reinforcements. Lee is deprived of reinforcements. So losses that Grant inflicts on Lee, those are permanent losses. Well, that's not technically true. While Robert E. Lee cannot get fresh soldiers, he can pull soldiers from other theaters in the American Civil War. And if you recall earlier in our streams, we talked that this Overland Campaign is one piece of a multi-pronged strategy of Grant's to have Union forces invading the Confederacy simultaneously, hopefully stretching their resources putty thin and ultimately forcing its collapse. We talked about how there was a small Union force that moved up the Shenandoah Valley. However, they were defeated at the Battle of New Market by a very small Confederate force led by John C. Breckinridge. Well, after Breckinridge defeats the Union at New Market, Lee's calling Breckinridge up. Get your butt back here to Richmond right now. I need your division. So Breckinridge is going to come and reinforce the Army in North Virginia. And there's also a Union force demonstrating outside of Richmond and Petersburg on the east side of these two cities, demonstrated in a little fishing community called Bermuda 100. It was the hope that Benjamin Butler can lead a Union force to cut the rail line between Richmond and Petersburg, thus threatening the Confederate capital from the south, while Grant came down with the main army from the north. Butler didn't do so well in that mission, and the Confederate forces that were in the Bermuda 100 area were able to hold back Union forces. Well, Lee's calling them Confederate defenders up now and is asking for reinforcements to be sent to the north side of Richmond. So you're going to have a division under the command of Robert Hoke. As well, you have John C. Breckinridge's division, both racing to reinforce the Army of North Virginia, who are now sitting on the northern outskirts of Richmond. How do I get back to my slideshow? Man, I'm really out of it tonight. So here we are. We got our two commanders, Ulysses S. Grant, Robert E. Lee. We can see the current strength and numbers they got. Grant has over a 2-to-1 advantage over Lee. Lee, however, is going to be getting some reinforcements. One of the key ones being Robert Hoke, whose division has been blunting Union incursions out of Bermuda 100, just to the southeast of Richmond. And Grant is getting a whole new Union Corps to assist the Army of the Potomac, and that is going to be the 18th Union Corps, who have been one of those Union forces trying to break out of the Bermuda 100, both no success. Their commander is William Baldy Smith. Yeah, his name's Baldy. You can probably guess why. And Smith actually has experience fighting on the outskirts of Richmond because he was part of the Peninsula Campaign 2 years earlier. So he's coming back onto some old ground he's familiar with. However, that ground does not hold necessary fond memories. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's an opportunity to get one last opportunity for Grant to get underneath Lee from the south and outflank him. That last opportunity is the crossroads known as Old Cold Harbor. The image above is a photograph taken during the American Civil War in June of 1864, while this campaign was actually ongoing. And the image below is taken from Google Maps, showing the approximate vantage point of the historic photograph. Off to the left, you're going to see a road that'll eventually take you to Mechanicsville, and then you can take it into the city of Richmond. It's called the Old Cold Harbor Road. Kind of starts running from northeast to southwest. Then it cuts up north to hit Mechanicsville. It meets another road juncture and then shoots directly south into Richmond. The other roads that you're going to see, off to the right, you're going to see a place known as Did I say right? White House? I think it's White Horse, actually. No, White House. Yeah, White House, Virginia. I'm thinking about White Horse Tavern. I got White Horse Tavern on the mind now because I was doing my script for the Battle Paoli, American Revolution, future retracing history. Don't know when I'll be out. Anyways, off to the right, which is going east, you're going to see White House. White House is a very small community. It's actually, I think, more of a plantation in a community, and it sits along the Pamunkey River. And that is actually that's actually a place where Grant can offload soldiers by boat and supplies by boat coming down from Washington, D.C. And it's actually at White House where Baldy Smith's 18 Corps are going to come up from boats coming up from the Bermuda 100, be offloaded at White House, and then they can make a beeline to take possession of the old Cold Harbor crossroads. And then you also see a place known as Beulah Church. It's one of two churches in the Cold Harbor area, just about a mile north of Beulah Church is Bethesda Church. We'll be talking about both of those churches north of Old Cold Harbor throughout tonight's stream. So getting possession of the old Cold Harbor crossroads is key to Grant's mission of finally outflanking Lee and forcing him to fight on ground of his choosing. All right. And something else to point out, and this is the part where we get demonetized. These are historic photographs. The National Park Service, an entity of the federal government, posts these images all the time on all sorts of public publishments. Jeez, man, I'm doing horrible with the English language tonight. I apologize, guys. National Park Service publishes these images all the time. You can look at them for free publicly for the Library of Congress. There should be no issue of showing these historical images. The reason I'm showing you images of human remains is I want you to understand that the old Cold Harbor crossroads is not a new target of the American Civil War. Going back to that Peninsula campaign, when George B. McClellan made an amphibious landing and moved his way up the Virginia Peninsula to attack Richmond from the southeast, well, he was pushed back when Robert E. Lee took charge on the Army of North Virginia in a series of battles known as the 7 Days. And the largest of those 7 days battles, Gaines Mill, occurred around the old Cold Harbor crossroads. So, yes, the ground that this battle is about to occur on that we're talking about today is already a battlefield. It's already battle scarred. And both soldiers are going to talk about, as they move into this region, how gloomy it is, how uninvited it is. This is the last place they want to be. They know that they had just fought here 2 years previously, and especially for the Union forces, this was a very, very dark day for the Union, the Battle of Gaines Mill. They were driven. This was one of the first major efforts by Robert E. Lee to drive the Union away from Richmond at the start of him commanding the Army of Northern Virginia. So imagine these troops moving into this vicinity and they're ordered to start digging trenches. And then they're unearthing skeletons dead from Gaines Mill 2 years previously. That's totally not going to have any ramifications for their mental health. No. Yeah, I know lemonade just went all over me. Man, I'm a wreck tonight. I apologize, guys. Now, there's actually 2 Cold Harbors in this area. There's Old Cold Harbor, which you'll see circled on the right hand of the map here. Then you got New Cold Harbor. Essentially, there's 2 different little taverns. The idea of Cold Harbor, it is not a cold place, and it is not a water port. Cold Harbor really is referring to that these taverns provide some sort of shelter for travelers, particularly those coming out of Northern Virginia, coming into Richmond, or farmers taking crops to market in Richmond, and they just want to stop, get a cold drink, get a cold food. These taverns are not cooking food, so this is fast food service, essentially, the 19th centuries. These cold harbors were that this battle's about to be fought across. So the Union want to get possession of Old Cold Harbor because of the vital crossroads, which will allow them to bring the main Union body away from Totopotomoy Creek, taking roadways north to south that come into Old Cold Harbor, move west down the Cold Harbor Road for New Cold Harbor, and then try to make a beeline to take Richmond, or turn around and get into the rear of the Army of Northern Virginia. On May 31st, 1864, the first shots of what will be the Battle of Cold Harbor are going to ensue. Union cavalry, which is on the extreme Union left flank of the Potomac Creek line, are going to make their way over to Old Church, fight off Confederate cavalry, and then begin making our way to the Old Cold Harbor crossroads. This cavalry force for the Union is under the charge of, I gotta read his name over here. It's General Torbert, but he got Brigadier General Alfred Thomas Archimedes Torbert. What a name. Torbert's cavalry division is very unique because they're kind of a bit of celebrities, especially with the American Civil War. You don't recognize them as Torbert's division. You do recognize them as Buford's division. So these are the vestiges of John Buford's Union Cavalry Division, which successfully held back Confederate attack on the early morning of July 1st at the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, Buford sadly died at the end of 1863. I believe it was from tuberculosis, I think he had, or it was pneumonia. It was one of the two things. He rapidly passed away not long after his greatest success. And the division wound up in the hands of, oddly enough, a former infantry commander, that being Brigadier General Torbert here. Torbert does a pretty good job with the division, even though this is not what he's trained to do. Seems to have really good discipline, really good handling over this division. And after all, most of the division's made up of veteran cavalrymen who have been in some of the war's most grueling actions. So it makes for a natural fit. Torbert is going to aggressively move upon the Cold Harbor. Man, I can't say Cold Harbor. I should just say Cold Harbor. Moves on the Cold Harbor crossroads, moving in from the northeast. He's pushing back Confederate cavalry under the charge of Fitzhugh Lee. By the way, this is a nephew of Robert E. Lee, so this is actually a family relation. Fitzhugh Lee is going to lose the old Cold Harbor crossroads. He's going to move down the Cold Harbor Road over to New Cold Harbor, and he's waiting for his uncle to send him reinforcements. He's like, Uncle Lee, can you help me out here? And Lee is going to oblige. He is going to instruct the Army Corps of General Anderson. By the way, these are Longstreet's troops, Longstreet being badly wounded early in his campaign in the wilderness. He's going to order Anderson to abandon the Totopotomoy Creek line, move to the southeast, and try to recapture the Cold Harbor crossroads. However, it's going to get time for him to get going. In the meantime, Hoke's division, which has been coming up from Petersburg and the Bermuda 100, arrives at New Cold Harbor to reinforce Fitzhugh Lee. Hoke's division at 4 p.m. on May 31st are going to make an assault. They see what they think is a very small vestige of Union cavalry, and typically infantry does very good against cavalry. Cavalry, not typically known for their fighting, having a long, protracted fight. So Hoke hopes he can overwhelm this Union cavalry force holding his vital crossroads. Boy, is he in for a shock. And again, it's because these are veteran cavalry fighters who are well experienced with delaying and holding back larger forces of enemy infantry. So they're going to dismount, and using repeater rifles are going to be able to blunt Hoke's advances on the old Cold Harbor crossroads, keeping them in Union hands. However, something interesting is going to happen. While Torbert's been successful in holding the crossroads up to this point, Sheridan's getting a little concerned. Phil Sheridan, who's in charge of all of the Army of the Potomac's cavalry. He is going to recall Torbert out of the crossroads, call him back to the main Union battle line closer to Totopotomoy Creek. He feels that Torbert is about to be overwhelmed by Confederate reinforcements. Torbert begrudgingly obliges and gives up the crossroads the evening of May 31st. However, when Grant receives word of this, he implores upon Sheridan, no, I need those crossroads for my master plan. I need them. Don't you see how important this is? So Sheridan will agree. He's going to order Torbert to get his division right back to the crossroads. And miraculously, Lee nor Hoke have made a move on the old crossroads once the cavalry had abandoned it. So Torbert sighs a relief. He's going to move back into those old crossroads, reoccupy his positions as night falls over the Cold Harbor battlefield. So at the end of May 31st, the Cold Harbor crossroads are in Union hands. Lee is starting to pour copious amounts of sweat. Yins, 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 stuttering readout. Yeah, sometimes that's me sometimes. Sanitary Harbor. Yeah, maybe they got sanitary there. Sanitary set up shop there in that tavern over there. They take over everything eventually, at least at one point around these parts. Sanitary was everywhere. Washington, D.C. Sorry. No Canucks in this. No Canucks in this story. This is all about Virginia and a bunch of other Americans. All right, so early morning hours of June 1st, Torbert is back in the Cold Harbor crossroads, and his division are entrenching around it. They're instructed that you need to hold these crossroads until Union infantry arrives to relieve you. That Union infantry is going to be Baldy Smith's 18th Corps, as well as Horatio Wright's 6th Corps. And you'll know that the 6th Corps have become the most valuable players for the Union Army during the Overland Campaign. They're kind of their special operations force up to this point. So you're going to want those guys to be there as soon as possible in this critical situation. Torbert digs in, going down the line. I'm going to list it over here. Not over here. I have it listed over here. You're going to have, starting from the very far, going from the Union right, which is actually going up to Beulah Church, you're going to have Wesley Meredith's brigade. Then in the center, actually guarding the main crossroads, is going to be George Armstrong Custer. There he is. There's everybody's favorite cavalry commander in American history. Custer is guarding the crossroads as sun rises over the battlefield. And then going down the Union left flank, I should say, there's also going to be the brigade of Thomas Devon. Devon's reaching out to try to anchor the Union line to the Chickahominy River to give it some natural anchorage. As sun rises, Anderson is going to start arriving with lead elements of his infantry corps for the Confederates. They're going to move in to help out Robert Hoke's division. And while Hoke and Anderson would really like to be able to make a united assault across the fields west of Cold Harbor, however, Anderson's corps, let alone Hoke's division, are not fully organized in the early morning light. So they decide instead, while they're getting everybody organized, that they should just send out a much smaller attack, more of a probe. That way, if they make a frontal assault, it won't be a complete disaster. They're going to test the waters of the Union cavalry to really see if these guys are the legendary cavalry division that defended Gettysburg. They're going to send out a brigade of South Carolinians under the charge of Lawrence M. Kite. Lawrence M. Kite. I'm going to say Kite, and then everybody's going to correct me in the comments section after this because I can't pronounce anything. Kite is a very interesting character of the American Civil War. Kite was he was a congressman during the 1850s. Of course, he was representing South Carolina, and he got involved in one of the most controversial moments leading up to the Civil War, and that was the caning of Senator Charles Sumner at the hands of Representative Preston Brooks. What ended up happening was Preston Brooks, along with Kite as being his right-hand man, they kind of barged into the Senate chamber. Sumner had said some not so kind things of a relative of Brooks, Brooks being pro-slavery, Sumner being anti-slavery. And Brooks basically told Sumner, all right, you want to talk? How about walk the walk? And then proceeded to brutally cane Sumner on the floor of the Senate chamber. And before anybody can go in to drag Brooks off of Sumner, Kite stepped forward and threatened everybody with a small firearm. So yeah, Kite, a little bit controversial to the politics that would lead to the cause of the American Civil War. He also apparently started a full-on brawl on the House of Representatives floor as well. Yeah, Kite's a fighter. However, when he's relatively new to being here on this front of the war. He did raise a regiment of the 20th South Carolina Infantry. However, they were mostly guarding the fortifications around Charleston throughout 1862 and 63. It's only in 1864, as a massive Union body is pushing on Richmond, that Robert E. Lee is going to have the leverage with the Confederate government to start pulling from other Confederate forces around the country to reinforce the Army of North Virginia. And Kite's 20th South Carolinians are one of them. They're put into very good company, that being the famed Brigade of South Carolinians that was once under the command of General Kershaw. Kershaw was bumped up to divisional command just on the eve of the Battle of Cold Harbor, and due to chain of command shenanigans, Kite is actually put in charge of Kershaw's brigade. Now, one Confederate veteran would remark that while Kite definitely had the spirit to lead in battle, he didn't necessarily have the discipline to do so, which, again, drawn out the sidearm on the Senate chamber floor. Yeah, not very disciplined. In any case, at 8 in the morning on June the 1st, Kite is going to lead this Confederate brigade across toward the Union cavalry that's dismounted and entrenched, and it does not go too well for him. They're charging right into Merritt's brigade, who, again, they got the Spencer repeating rifle. You get 7 rounds shot off, and 7 rounds can be shot off before you have to reload it. So they greatly outpace the Confederates in terms of rate of fire. Kite himself is going to be mortally wounded in his attack, and very quickly his brigade will fall back to the Confederate battle line. Not long after Kite's failed attack on the Union cavalry, the 1st Union infantry is going to show up at the crossroads, that being Horatio Wright's 6th Corps, to the relief of Torbert, who is going to withdraw from the front lines, and he's going to let the infantry handle the battle from here. Before I did this research for this stream, I had no idea about this cavalry action. The only thing I really knew about of Cold Harbor were the 2 massive infantry assaults that we're about to get into. I had no idea that there's this whole other day's worth of cavalry actions, and I also did not realize it was the vestiges of Buford's old division that was involved with it. And now the lights are twitching. First, I'm interrupted for a very important phone call, by the way, so I'm not upset about that. I had to take that. And now the power is fluctuating. Can I ever get through a stream without technical difficulties? No. I love it. It reminds me of half my childhood, and Redoubt knows about Mimos, which makes him someone I'd fall into battle. Oh, okay. I do know where good pizza is. I mean, that's a very valid reason to follow somebody, put their life in their hands. He knows good pizza. I'm going to follow him into the Valley of Shadow of Death. What else we have? What about Hooker? Well, Hooker is not here. He had his chance to command the Army of the Potomac, and you can watch the Chancellorsville stream all about how he bungled that opportunity. Now, immediately, Grant is hoping that the Union forces that are gathering at Cold Harbor are going to mount a massive counter assault on the Confederate lines, because he's sensing blood in the water. He's like, it's weak. It's a very thin Confederate line that's dividing my Union troops and the road to Richmond. However, that attack is going to get delayed, and it really is going to be until the late afternoon of June 1st that the 6th Corps, as well as the 18th Corps, who have just arrived, are going to get properly organized on the battlefield and ready to actually take the fight to the Confederate lines, which is going to allow for Hoke's division and Anderson's Corps to start digging their own entrenchments across from the Union battle line. Now, eventually, the Union infantry attack is going to get underway around 6:30 in the evening. Both the 6th and 18th Corps are going to come out of their earthworks, dash out of woodlots of pine trees into open ground, sometimes being obscured once more by pine trees. They're going to go right up into those breastworks that the Confederates have established, and it doesn't go too well for them. And here comes the coughing fits. One moment, folks. Here it comes. I told you, the voice is all dried out. I'm falling apart as I charge toward them Confederate breastworks. What's going to end up happening is there's going to be multiple elements that are attack. Probably the most noteworthy is going to be that of the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery. They are attached to the 6th Corps Brigade of Emory Upton. And you'll recall Upton's name pretty good. We've been talking about him throughout the Overland Campaign. He's really got a chance to shine. There's dispute over how much he's involved in innovating tactics for the Union Army during his campaign. If he did not innovate them, he definitely experimented with them, which I know those are synonyms, but in this technical use, they're not. We don't know if he actually came up with these ideas in his head, but he's really the first major officer to execute them out on the battlefield and seeing they work. They're not really any new tactics. They're essentially a return of the old phalanx maneuvers of ancient times, where instead of having a nice long battle line to shoot a wide volley at an enemy line, you're actually going to have them in a narrow column, multiple ranks deep, and you're just going to gun it. You're just going to gun it for the enemy position like one big battering ram, not fire your guns, break through the enemy line, and then overwhelm them. This has been tried at Spotsylvania. It's been tried at the North Anna River to varying degrees of effect. But Grant is still confident in his tactic, and Upton's being encouraged to keep trying it and again, as well as other brigade, division, and corps commanders in the Union Army late in the Overland Campaign. And that's exactly what Emory Upton's planned to do. You can see Upton's brigade in particular. They're lining right along the Cold Harbor Road, facing toward the Confederate Brigade of Carolinians and the charge of General Clingman. Just to the right of Upton is going to be General Truex's Union Brigade. Then going up from there, you're going to have Smith. You're going to go up from there. You got elements of the 18th Corps. They're all doing a similar, like they're stacking like giant human battering rams, getting ready to burst out of their earthworks and hopefully can pierce through what they perceive to be a thin Confederate line. Now, amongst those that are in it is the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery. They did not start life as an artillery unit. They were technically an infantry unit. The 19th Confederates in Connecticut. No, it's not a thing. Redoubt. The 19th Connecticut Volunteer Infantry. They were organized in the summer of 1862, but in 1863 were redesignated as a heavy artillery regiment. Essentially meant they were going to garrison fortifications guarding Washington, D.C. And we've talked about these heavies earlier, especially at Spotsylvania. These heavies that didn't see much action so far in the war. They've been really just doing parades and drills for the politicians of Washington, D.C. to see and feel safe while the war's happening elsewhere. But in 1864, the heavy losses of the Overland Campaign is going to necessitate Grant to call these heavies out of their massive garrisons in the cities and come to the front lines. So finally, the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery can do what it was originally designated to do, and that was to be an infantry regiment. They're under the command of Colonel Elijah Kellogg, who is imaged at the left, and they're also under the command of a Lieutenant Colonel. Oh man, I can't really speak tonight. I'm sorry, guys. I wish I could just have such a fluent voice. Instead, my tongue maybe I need to just cut off a few inches of my tongue. Maybe that'll solve it. They're under the second command of Lieutenant Colonel. I want to say it was Mulholland, but I can't find his name. I wrote his name down. Oh, James Hubbard, Lieutenant Colonel James Hubbard, who is imaged in the middle there. So Kellogg's commanding. Hubbard is second in command. And the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery really are not liking their time in the Army of the Potomac. Ever since they left Washington, D.C., it's been marching. And sometimes they're marching over 15 miles a day for sweltering hot conditions or pouring rain. They're really not able to deviate from their line of march to go forage for nicer food beyond the hardtack they're being issued. Also trying to get waters. Quite a difficult task, especially when you're constantly on the move. Throat's giving out. I'm only 40 minutes into the stream. Throat's giving out. They're really agitated by the veterans of the Army of Potomac derided them as bandbox regiments. Like one of the worst things you could be called. You're basically being called a coward. You're basically called a politician soldier. You're a tin soldier. They're not taken too kindly to that regard. So the 2nd Connecticut is looking for an opportunity to prove themselves to the veteran soldiers in the Army of the Potomac. And they're going to be given that at Cold Harbor on June 1st. They're going to be the lead element of Upton's brigade to attack the Confederate line just west of the Cold Harbor crossroads. If the 2nd Connecticut could hypothetically break through this Confederate line, the road to Richmond is wide open. They're going to be seen as heroes by the rest of the veterans. Throughout the afternoon, as the time of attack keeps getting pushed farther and farther and back, Kellogg takes advantage of the situation to very methodically plan out how he's going to lay out the regiment. He's methodically constructing what you're going to do when you leave our breastworks, what you're going to do when you're moving, how fast you're going to be moving. And I actually got a direct quote from the history of the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery, which there's actually a link to in the description below. So after the stream, if you want to read the story of this regiment, it's one of the more, I've always been fascinated by this regiment's history. These heavy artillery regiments, they get into the war pretty late. Kellogg is going to instruct his men late on June 1st. Now, men, when you have the order to move, goes in steady, keep cool, keep still until I give you the order to charge, and then go in arms port with a yell. Don't a man of you fire a shot until we are within the enemy's breastworks. I shall be with you. So, in any case, for as great as exciting these words are of Kellogg, the historian of the regiment later on, Theodore Vale, is going to write that most of the regiment was in a bit of a stupor from the constant marching. I imagine some of these troops are a bit dehydrated. There's a moment when they arrive at the crossroads that day on June 1st. These men stack their muskets, and they immediately start dispersing without orders. They want to go get water badly. They know there's springs in the area. And Upton's like, oh, no, where are you going? Where are you going? No, you're going to stay right here. We must guard the crossroads until we're given further orders. And the 2nd Connecticut's are just like, So while Kellogg's trying to give them this big pep talk, you can just imagine going, when's lunch? I don't blame them. That's a really human feeling. So 6:30, Kellogg is going to lead his regiment into their very first major battle. They are going to charge across this small field in front of Clingman's Carolinian troops. They're going to get within 20 yards of the Confederate breastworks. Clingman's actually going to talk later on about even being able to see visually Kellogg. He gets a very good description of him. He's out there waving his sword, rallying his troops forward. And as he's after getting one of his orders, 2 bullets are going to strike him in the head, killing Kellogg instantly on the battlefield. The 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery find themselves in quite a predicament. They have advanced farther than most of the attack on June 6th. Most of the other brigades are quite a distance back from them, so they're all the way out here at the foot of the Confederate breastworks. If they try to fall back, they're going to get their shot in the back. They're not going to be able to keep going forward. They're without a commander now. In an incredible moment, Upton is going to actually personally run out there up to the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery. He's going to shout at the 2nd Connecticut to lie down, reload. We must hold this line at all costs. He does not want to lose any ground. Keep in mind, Upton, he knows about what happens when you're not reinforced, when you're making a punch through the enemy lines. Remember what happened to Spotsylvania. He punched a hole through the Confederate center, but had to withdraw due to a lack of support. So Upton pins the 2nd Connecticut at the foot of the Confederate earthworks. To his right, his companion over there, Truex, had a little bit better success. You'll notice Truex, it might be really hard to see, but just above from Upton, there's Truex. At the front of his attack is the regiment he's actually attached to that he started the war with. It's the 14th New Jersey Regiment. They're going to find that there is about a 200-yard gap in the Confederate line. The issue is Kershaw's division, where it ends and Hoke's division begins. They have rested their flanks right on either end of a ravine that's cut through by a little stream. And the 14th New Jersey go, how about we go for that? They punch a hole through the Confederate line, pour in on into either side of the Confederate flanks, and try to move into the Confederate earthworks for this little ravine in the line. However, Confederate reinforcements are going to be rushed in at the nick of time to drive the 14th New Jersey and the rest of Truex Command out of this ravine, which later is known as Bloody Run. This will be the furthest that the 6th Corps makes it into the Confederate lines on June the 1st. The 18th Corps, you can see they're also coming down farther to the north of the battle we're talking about. They get up at least within about 50 yards forward of the Confederate positions. They too, though, are pinned down at the foot of the earthworks. As darkness begins to settle over the battlefield, the Confederates are going to, I wouldn't say they evacuate these lines, but they kind of pull back from their forward positions just a few feet or so to readjust their line and start digging new earthworks under the cover of darkness. And thus ends the June 1st assault at Cold Harbor. Probably the most active day at Cold Harbor. It's June the 1st. The morning, you got Kite's failed attack on Merritt's dismounted cavalry division, brigade, corps, all the wonderful things. Then you got this massive infantry assault by the 6th and 18th Corps. They're throwing themselves at well-entrenched Confederate forces. Several of these groups get onto the foot of the Confederate earthworks, but they're unable really to make a deep dent into the Confederate line, minus the breakthrough at Bloody Run. In any case, and before we finish up, I should talk a bit more about and this is the sketch we're seeing here is actually of the June 1st assault. This is showing you Ricketts' division, which Upton's brigade would have been included into this mess. Yeah, he would have been, right? Yeah, he would have been. Yeah, okay, I had to double check. Yep. You're seeing parts of Ricketts' division charging toward the Confederate positions. This was sketched by Alfred Waud, so this is the best way we could get a visual of what that battle looked like. You can see there in the foreground, you can see there, or I could say the middle ground, you can see a very dark line. Those are the Confederate earthworks. That's some of Clingman's brigade holding back Upton's brigade, who's assaulting. Clingman is photographed in the top left. General Wolford, who was on the very extreme right flank of Kershaw's division, he is on the top right. That's kind of showing you both ends of that ravine. You got the end of Hoke's division with Clingman, and you got the end of Kershaw's division with Wolford. In the bottom left, you have Upton, who's regular face to us now, and then to the far right, bottom right, you're going to have Truex pictured there. Truex will eventually be breveted to a brigadier general. I think during Cold Harbor, he still technically had his colonelcy rank. He didn't become like a brigadier general until the very end of the war. At the end of the American Civil War, the Union Army just started giving out like brigadier generals to all these guys. Like, yep, you're not going to be in the Army full time. You get to be a brigadier general honorary. They're going to be discharged here in a couple weeks. So there's a lot of these guys. You rightfully deserve a recognition of a higher rank. They've been through the war from the very start. A lot of these guys, you made it through the end of the war as an officer. Congratulations, you're a brigadier general. You're a brigadier general. Now get the F out. That's kind of how it worked. So night settles over the Cold Harbor battlefield. As for the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery, they suffered approximately a 20% casualty rate in their first battle. I want to say it was about, I have it written down here, the technicals about the details. Over 300 men of the regiment were made casualties in this first major action they'd ever been in. And in this first major action, they lost their commanding officer. Kellogg is dead. The shock of this battle really harms the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery. This first exposure to the brutality of war, that Hubbard, who should technically take charge of the army in this, refuses to remain in permanent command of the regiment. He doesn't feel confident enough that he can lead the regiment going forward. And Vail theorizes in the history of the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery that the reason Hubbard did not want to take charge immediately after Kellogg's death Hubbard did not want to be involved in another frontal attack. He feared that the Union commanders were about to throw himself and the rest of the Sixth Corps at another frontal assault at the Confederate earthworks, and that would have been hopeless, and he was not taking the blame for it. So Hubbard advised Upton to find a replacement that Upton felt was suitable for the regiment. The soldiers didn't take too kindly to Upton's choice. It was a classmate of Upton's from West Point, and that man, he didn't necessarily have a fun time in command of the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery. He ultimately was reassigned, and eventually Hubbard actually did become the colonel of the regiment in 1865 and would lead the 2nd Connecticut Heavy Artillery in another attack on entrenched Confederate forces at Petersburg. Although, thankfully, their casualties were nowhere near as severe as they were here at Cold Harbor. And on the far right, you're going to see an image of the monument to this regiment at the Cold Harbor battlefield. It's one of only 2 monuments dedicated to a particular regiment at Cold Harbor, the other being the 8th New York Heavy Artillery Regiment. Notice a theme here of heavies and Cold Harbor. Cold Harbor was really the coming out party for these heavy regiments to prove their might. Tragically, by proving their might, it meant shedding a lot of blood, and in many cases, this was a lot of senseless blood, as we'll learn about later on. The attack on June 1st, however, gives Grant optimism. Grant feels that this proves even further that we were so close to breaking through the Confederates at Cold Harbor tonight. If I'm able to move the rest of the Army of the Potomac down to Cold Harbor, we can pierce through this thin line and we'll be on the road to Richmond, and I'll have carte blanche over where I want to put Robert E. Lee's army, and I could possibly end the war. He decides he instructs Meade, make preparations for another frontal assault at Cold Harbor at dawn the next day. Now, Meade isn't necessarily as confident that they can break through. I mean, Meade is definitely weary of Robert E. Lee after the Battle of Gettysburg. He has a little more experience handling Lee than Grant does. But even Meade's like, there's an opportunity here. And he's like, well, the best way to do this is to bring the heavy hitter out. And the heavy hitter of the Army of the Potomac, as we've talked about, is the 2nd Corps under command of Winfield Scott Hancock. Now, the problem is Winfield Scott Hancock is several miles away from Cold Harbor to the northwest, still upon the Totopotomoy Creek line. He, in fact, is now on the right flank of the Union battle line north of Richmond. So that means he is going to have to make a multi-mile march behind the Union line to get to the left flank to reinforce Meade and the Army of the Potomac on the left at Cold Harbor. Well, if you have the right guide, it should not be too difficult. Just get on one road, go east, then go south, go to Cold Harbor. Cold Harbor is a major crossroads, however. But the aide that's sent to guide the vanguard of Hancock's Corps off the Totopotomoy Creek line and into the Cold Harbor line, he takes the wrong road in the dark. And by the time the 2nd Corps is going to show up at Cold Harbor, it is well into the morning of June 2nd. Sun is blaring down on the battlefield. It's pretty obvious what the Union are doing. The Confederate, Hoke's division can see, these Union soldiers moving into position. And Lee, under the cover of darkness, has also decided to shuffle troops to reinforce his defenses at Cold Harbor. He has actually shuffled over elements of... Hold on, I got a cough again. Oh, no, I need it. Lee is actually going to shift several reinforcements. He's going to move most of his army now off the Totopotomoy Creek line. He realizes Grant's trying to get to Richmond via the Cold Harbor crossroads. So Lee is now fully committed to the Cold Harbor line. Grant decides, okay, maybe we shouldn't attack today. First, Grant's going to postpone the attack until 5 p.m. on June 2nd. And then he just decides, you know what? Let's just wait till the next morning. We'll wait the attack in the early morning hours of June the 3rd. This will give a whole day for the 2nd Corps to rest up, to get reinforced. I can shimmy more of my troops down into position around Cold Harbor to strengthen my right flank. This can work out in my favor. It also means his troops are able to spend the whole day improving on their earthworks. And these earthworks that started out on the night of May 31st into June 1st, well, they're turned into I would argue proper trenches, if not elements, they're starting to look more and more like fortresses. Now, don't be wrong; these aren't permanent trench works. They're not planning to stay here forever and ever. But after the whole campaign of every time they fight a battle, they dig in. The Confederates, and as well as the Union, have both gotten more and more experience to build trenches more efficiently. So the ones you're going to see at Cold Harbor are the most complex yet built by Union Confederate forces in the American Civil War. So throughout the hot day of June 2nd, the Union are digging in, the Confederates are digging in. The Confederates are fortifying, they're falling trees, they're putting out obstacles, they're actually sighting, they're actually going out and putting posts out in the clearing they've just cut, and they're putting in basically target lines to show the defenders, when the enemy is going to come into effective range, so they know when to hold their fire, to have discipline, to maximize their firepower. And then, matters worse, the Union are seeing all this, and they're starting to go, we're really gonna attack here. Hey Grant, how about do one of them outflank lead to the southeast again? Can you pull one of them outflanking maneuvers again? We really don't want to attack these defenses. But in any case, Grant has entrusted Meade to organize an attack for the early morning hours of June the 3rd, 1864. It also should be noted that since you have all these basically, are kind of like leapfrogging over each other. These divisions, these corps are leapfrogging out of the Totopotomoy Creek line into the Cold Harbor line. That means the Union right flank is now under the protection of the 5th and 9th Corps. Yay. I know I spelled 11th. I meant 9th Corps. Oh boy, Gouverneur K. Warren and Ambrose Burnside, our 2 corps commanders that suffer from a case of the slows. And they fail to really exploit the opportunity they have, that since Lee has shuffled troops to Cold Harbor, that his left flank is now dangerously exposed throughout June 2nd at Bethesda Church. They really don't do anything. They just kind of sit there and go, that's interesting. Lee shuffling troops out of his trenches at Totopotomoy Creek. I wonder where they're going. Anyways. And that brings us to June the 3rd, 1864. The most famous day when it comes to dealing with the Battle of Cold Harbor, and probably the most overrated day. Grant felt, since his Union cavalry was able to withstand Confederate infantry attacks at Cold Harbor, and also that his Union infantry attack on the night of June the 1st got really close, got right up against the Confederate trenches. He felt that the Army of North Virginia was weak and demoralized. He felt that with the right amount of troops, a full frontal assault, the entire Union line moving out of their trenches at Cold Harbor, moving right into the Confederate lines, that they would be able to pierce through the Army of North Virginia at long last and end the American Civil War. That's at least the high hope. It's very uncharacteristic of Grant that he makes this opinion that he's like, I can end the war here, that I can break the line here. After all of the events during the Overland Campaign, where he makes frontal assault after frontal assault and is forced back into his trenches and has to outflank Lee to find new ground of better choosing, you'd think by now he'd caught on that Lee's not leaving him earthworks, that Lee is fortified pretty strongly. He wants Grant to assault him at this rate. In any case, Grant has instructed Meade, go take that Confederate line, break through it, go on to Richmond. And on Meade's part, it doesn't seem like he does a really good job of getting the Army of Potomac ready for this attack on June the 3rd. We don't know if it's Grant, Meade, Hancock, Wright, Smith, Warren, Burnside, down to the brigades, down to the regimental levels, whose fault it really is, but nobody really does good reconnaissance of the enemy positions, because one good look by Union headquarters, of what the Confederates were cooking outside of Cold Harbor in terms of defense would have made him think This is a very, very bad idea. Much like how Grant thought attacking the North Anna line was a very, very bad idea. But in any case, at 4:30 in the morning on June the 3rd, the attack is going to begin. The in blah 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 blah. I can't speak. Smith, Wright, and Hancock, their troops are all going to come out of their earthworks just as the sun is starting to not even really rise yet, but we're just starting to get some purple in the sky. The first vestiges of sunlight. They're going to charge toward the Confederate battle lines. And, well, it's over really before it begins. The best success is by the Second Corps. They're going to find that there is a very narrow, about a 50-foot gap in the. Is it 50 foot or 50 yards? I'm freaking out over these technical details because I know somebody's going to come and hunt me down. 50-foot gap existed in the Confederate line, particularly on Turkey Hill, which is being guarded by the division of John C. Breckinridge. Again, we have a situation where it's not a run, but it's rather a little farm lane, kind of makes a dip between these two Confederate units. And the Confederate commander that was right around there, we're talking more on the regimental level, after all night having his troops dig into the hard red clay to build as strong of a defense as possible, knowing that a Union attack is imminent, what he's going to end up doing is he's going to only put a picket, a skirmish line in that sunken road, and he's going to move the rest of the regiment, the rest of his command on top of Turkey Hill to give them a much needed rest, kind of sleep the last few hours of darkness before the sun comes up. Well, they are in for a surprise because here comes Francis Barlow's division of Hancock's Second Corps charging through their skirmishers. They melt away, and up comes Barlow's division charging up Turkey Hill. They've made a very narrow punch through the Confederate right flank of Cold Harbor. They're going to take about 300 Confederate prisoners. They're going to capture several battle flags, a couple artillery pieces. It's a very nice momentum rush in the first few moments of the attack. And it kind of reminds them about how when they were able to pierce through the Muleshoe of Spotsylvania that early morning, those first few moments, taking all these prisoners, all of these weapons. And just like the Muleshoe, in the nick of time come Confederate reinforcements. And this is going to be actually a brigade of Floridians. Interesting story about them. It's actually an old Florida brigade and a new Florida brigade that have merged together into Florida Man. The almighty Florida Man Brigade, really. They have two commanders. The one I want to talk about is Joseph Finnegan. Finnegan had been in charge of a department for the military in Florida for the Confederates earlier in the war. And in 1864, he's a little bit of a celebrity for the Confederates. He had led a successful counterattack on a Union incursion into Florida in the state's only major battle, the Battle of Ulysses. And Finnegan took claim for the victory, albeit there's controversy over who really deserves credit for the strategy of that battle. In any case, Finnegan got a little bit of celebrity status, and when Richmond is under threat, Lee is pulling from all parts of the Confederate War Department to come and assist him in the Army of North Virginia. That's going to include Finnegan. Now, when Finnegan's Florida battalions, they weren't even technically called regiments, they were battalions, show up in Richmond, the populace up there aren't really all that enthusiastic about them. Florida was heavily criticized by Virginians during this war. There was controversies. The Virginians and Northern Confederates, I would say, tend to say that Floridians were so easily susceptible to desertion, that they wanted to go back to the Sunshine State, that the Virginians not good enough for them. They want to go back to the palm. They want to go back and rest under the sun and be in their garrisons down in Florida, rest under the sunshine. Well, the truth is, they were garrison troops. These are, I guess, the Confederate version of the bandpox regiments, these heavies. They also were a mixture of being overweight and underweight at the same time, just because their rations that they were used to in Florida were far superior, but sometimes more infrequent than what you got on the front lines. What I mean is they maybe had a wider food selection, but that nice, good food, that came in short spurts due to supply shortages. So they're in pretty homely attire when they show up in Richmond. So Virginia is none too thankful that this 1,000 Floridian brigade has shown up. The new Floridians are happy to unite with the veteran Floridians, which have fought through most of the campaigns of the American Civil War from Lee up to this point. And well, when Barlow pierces through the Confederate line, here comes Finnegan and his Floridians looking to prove themselves. They smash right into Barlow. Brief but vicious hand-to-hand combat. The two sides are clubbing each other with the butts of their muskets. Eventually, Finnegan's Floridians, with the assistance of some Marylanders, overwhelm Barlow's Union troops. Barlow's troops snake down off Turkey Hill, trying to hold on to the ground as much as they can. They don't want a repeat of the Mule Shoe, but that's exactly what this has become. They're driven out of the Confederate works, and they're going to continue to provide the Barlow's troops are going to still put some heavy fire on the front line of the Confederate right flank. So the Confederates aren't out of the woodwork yet when it comes to the right flank of their line, but they've successfully driven Barlow out of the earthworks. This all really happened within less than a half an hour, what I just described, and this is the only gains that the Union can claim they made during this day. Moving up the line, right 6th Corps, they really don't want to repeat June 1st. I didn't even mention the June 1st assault by the 6th and 18th Corps produced over 2,000 casualties amongst the Union line. It was grueling. They do not want to repeat it. They are like, this attack is suicidal. We are not complying. What they're really doing is the 6th Corps, anytime they're ordered to move faster, go out there, get out of your earthworks, go charge, all they really do is just increase their rate of fire on the Confederates. They are not playing ball on this day. Smith is going to come out of his earthworks, albeit it's only going to be a few of his brigade. It's not going to be the whole 18th Corps. It's particularly going to be Martindale's brigade that comes out, and or division, I should say. Paul, man, I'm so confused today. I'm sorry, guys. Martindale's division of the 18th Corps do come out of the earthworks, charge forward toward Kershaw's defenses in the Confederate lines, but they're pinned down in a vicious crossfire. They're kind of marching right into an inverted V in the Confederate earthworks, so they're taking fire on both sides. Anytime Meade rides over to Smith and is like, you got to, keep renewing, keep going, keep attacking. And Smith's like, I ain't going until Wright goes. Well, Meade goes down. Wright's like, keep going. You got to reinforce Smith. Smith's flanks are exposed. And Wright's going, I am not losing any more men in this godforsaken battle. Meade goes down. The Hancock is like, what are you doing? You got to go out. Come on, you just pierced through. And Hancock and the veterans of the 2nd Corps are really just giving Meade the death glare at this point. Like, you know how many frontal assaults we've been through this month? And if we move up to the very right of the Union line, well, you are going to see, interestingly enough, Burnside come out of his earthworks and is going to make a belated attack on the extreme Confederate left flank. However, it really doesn't make any grounds. And Warren does nothing. He doesn't have the slows. He just does nothing. The Confederates many of the Confederate commanders, especially those that are along the Cold Harbor Road facing off against Wright and Smith, they're going to write later that they did not even realize a major Union offensive was happening that morning because the Union lines melted so quickly. In some say erroneously a half hour, but throughout this morning attack, the Union Army suffers about 6,000 casualties. It's the quickest that the Army of the Potomac has been beaten off the battlefield. And a lot of these are veteran units. They've been through the worst. And this quickly, they just melt away. Not even so much that they're shot down, but more the fact that once they start taking a heavy gunfire, they drop to the ground and they're stuck now in no man's land. If they try to crawl back to their Union trenches, they're going to be shot at by the Confederates. They can't go forward because I know it's a foolhardy effort to break through. By noon, Grant officially calls off any further attacks on the Cold Harbor line that day. Later on, I'm talking years later, in his memoirs, Grant would write that he had always regretted the last attack at Cold Harbor, that in hindsight, there was nothing really to gain out of it. But that is not where our story ends. And these are some images of the Cold Harbor unit of the Richmond Battlefield National Park. Richmond Battlefields is multiple units around the city of Richmond because there were multiple Union campaigns to take the Confederate capital. Funny about that. So this is just one piece of it. And again, this is not the only battle to occur on these particular pieces of grounds. 2 years prior, the Battle of Gaines Mill was waged over it. The top image is showing you from the far right where the 6th Corps would have come out of the tree line and attacked on June the 1st, and where they were providing heavy cover fire for the other attacks on June the 3rd. The left side of the image is the Confederate line of attack. The bottom, you're getting a Union perspective looking through the pine trees, looking toward where the Confederate trench line would have been. And that would have been really basically where you see that grass disappear into a black void of the tree line. That's where the Confederate trenches were and still are today. Cold Harbor has some of the best preserved earthworks from the American Civil War. If you do want to go see something, if you want to go see humps in the ground, they're pretty cool humps in the ground, very historic ones. In the aftermath of the June 3rd attack, those that are trapped in no man land, those that are wounded, or those that weren't able to escape back to their trenches, they're pinned down by sharpshooter fire coming from both the Union and Confederate sides, trying to aim at anything that moves out in no man's land. If you're stuck in either of the trenches, well, it's going to be very, very dangerous for you to leave those trenches because of the sharpshooter fire, as well as mortar fire. The Union had a battery of mortars. They were shelling, hammering the Confederate positions, and Confederate artillery would sporadically respond. And the illustration you see here was done by Wad in the days after the June 3rd attack. You're going to see those are bomb proofs. Those are holes in the side of the earthworks that the Union soldiers are digging in to get shelter from Confederate artillery barrages. It's clear that Grant is not going to be successful in breaching the Cold Harbor line. He knows this, and his corps commanders are basically begging him, go reach out to Lee and try to find a ceasefire so we can go recover our wounded. Grant sends a letter over to Lee and basically asks, would you allow unarmed stretcher bearers into no man's land? You won't shoot on them. Well, Lee says, the only way I'm going to do that, you must give me a formal flag of truce. That would basically be Grant admitting that he has failed to defeat Lee. That Lee has finally found a way to beat Grant. And Grant ain't doing that. He's like, no, I'm unconditional surrender Grant. I am not putting up a flag of truce. June the 6th, the Confederates are going to try to probe the Union center. However, they're not really able to get close to the Confederate line. They're marred by swamps. And again, Grant's going to ask, can you please allow me to send stretcher bearers out there? Lee's like, not until you give me a flag of truce. And on June the 7th, Grant finally agrees for a flag of truce, which allows the two sides to go out there and recover their dead. However, by this point, most of those wounded had died from their wounds. Ultimately, the Battle of Cold Harbor would lead to almost 2,000 Union deaths, 9,000 wounded soldiers, another 1,800 are missing, making for 12,000 Union casualties, 11% of the Army engaged. The Confederates, remarkably low casualties, considering what we've seen during the Overland Campaign. Now, I should mention there are caveats to these numbers. The thing being that this is for the American Battlefield Trust. Nobody really has an agreement over what the casualty figures are from this battle, since they bleed in so much with Totopotomoy Creek and the North Anna campaign. So it's kind of hard to gauge. This is what the American Battlefield Trust has provided me. So Lee, in terms of numbers, for once, can claim he actually has defeated Grant on the battlefield. However, does that mean this is going to cause Grant to finally call off his offensive? Robert E. Lee knows that if Grant outflanks him once again, it'll require Grant crossing the James River. And if he crosses the James River, the rail network hub of Petersburg, Virginia, is going to be open to be exploited. And I apologize. I'm going to have to pause again. There's stuff happening over there. I will be right back. Sorry, guys. Sorry tonight. I keep having a delay.
nature, baby!
Yes, we'll reel around the flag, boys will relive once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. We will relive from the hillside, all together from the plain, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors, up with the stars. We will reel around the flag, boys, and relive once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. Springing to the goal of your brothers born before, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And we'll come from the ranks with a million free more, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors, up with the stars. We will relive from the flag, boys, and relive once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. To the lyre true and brave, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And all of them poor, not the man who shall be slave, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors, up with the stars. We will rail around the flag, boys, and really once again, shouting the battle cry of freedom. From the east and from the west, shouting the battle cry of freedom. And we heard the rebel crow from the land that you do best, shouting the battle cry of freedom. The Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitor.
And we're back. And we're going to wrap this up pretty quickly. Sorry about the delays, guys, tonight. That's not it. That's not it. That's not it. That's it. So, yes. So, after setbacks at Cold Harbor, Grant decides he is going to cross the James River as Lee is fearing. He's not just going to do that, though. Grant is going to send Union cavalry under Phil Sheridan west to threaten the Virginia Central Railroad, which is bringing supplies out of the Shenandoah Valley to Richmond to supply the Army of North Virginia. So Sheridan cuts west. Lee detaches Jubal Early's corps. This is Richard Ewell's corps. Ewell is actually going to be, he's like really be telling relieve the command, but he's basically be told by Lee, your health is failing. You're not able to keep this campaign stuff up anymore. Find a more suitable position to assist me than killing yourself on the front lines. Early is going to take charge of the corps, and he's going to go try to drive Union forces out of the Shenandoah Valley. Grant will maneuver the Army of Potomac out of the Cold Harbor line under cover of darkness on June 12th and 13th. And he's actually to build a 2,000-foot pontoon bridge to allow the army to cross the James River and threaten the vital rail hub of Petersburg, Virginia. Lee does eventually put two and two together. What's happening? He pulls out of Cold Harbor, moves for Richmond, and is then going to fortify around Petersburg. Lee will be successful in blunting early attempts by Grant to get into the city of Petersburg. Grant decides to start digging trenches on the east side of the city, trying to find a way to outstretch Lee's right flank. Lee complies and starts digging earthworks. And for the next 10 months, the Union and Confederate forces will be gridlocked in trench warfare around the city of Petersburg. That will eventually end in April of 1865, ultimately leading to the end of the American Civil War. The Overland Campaign is over. I would like to thank you guys for tuning in to this series of videos. I apologize, we're cutting short the Cold Harbor video, but I've just been notified I got to go handle a couple other things. Thank you for staying in for today's chaos. We will be back on Thursday for another edition of Uncut History. But before we end the video, I am going to go check. I'm going to go check over to our poll, because as we were talking tonight about Cold Harbor, it's clear that Grant felt he had an opportunity why he would make all these risky maneuvers, especially the June 3rd one. I want to see what you guys think. What was the moment at Cold Harbor where the ability for Grant to achieve victory against Confederates at this particular site evaporated? I will figure out that as soon as my poll shows up. There we are. We're going to end that poll right now in the chat. Thank you guys for participating with it. And it appears 80% of our chat agree that delaying the attack that was supposed to be on June 2nd to June 3rd is what ultimately cost the Union to achieve a breakthrough Cold Harbor. And I would agree with that. I would say when I was doing the research for tonight's stream, like I said, I was really blown away by the fact there was this massive cavalry stand at Cold Harbor on May 31st, and they withstand against Confederate infantry that very few people acknowledge, and I want to do more reading about. But some of you guys also mentioned that this battle was over before it began, which is also a very good observation. I can see the argument being made on that, considering the fact that after so many times that Grant had attacked Lee and tried to break through his trenches, he's always repulsed. It does make you question, what did Grant think was so different about Cold Harbor? Grant would make the argument that it appeared that the Confederates were weak on their very far right flank of Cold Harbor because Union cavalry was able to withstand Confederate infantry. But I think it should be kept in mind that that cavalry division that held out of Cold Harbor was a cut above the rest, because that was Buford's division that was able to hold back an entire Confederate corps at the start of the Battle of Gettysburg. So this was not your average Union cavalrymen. These were cut above the rest. They did something a little bit unusual on May 31st and early June 1st. So perhaps that Grant just should have never made battle at Cold Harbor. At the end of the day, history tells us that Cold Harbor is remembered as Grant's biggest mistake in terms of his tactics. However, there's a lot of lessons to be taken from not just Cold Harbor, but the Overland Campaign. Grant and Lee see the advantages of digging troops in. They see the disadvantages of fighting a frontal assaults anymore during the American Civil War. They decide it's much wiser to dig their troops in, make sure to protect their supply lines for the long haul. And ultimately, it'll be Grant and the Army of Potomac that'll outlast Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia in the 10 months of siege trench warfare around Petersburg, Virginia. The Overland Campaign was the bloodiest campaign in the American Civil War. When you combine both sides' casualties, you're essentially looking at 100,000 Americans being made casualties, or 100,000 Americans being made casualties from these series of battles, from the Wilderness to Spotsylvania, moving down to the North Anna, and finally here at Cold Harbor. Cold Harbor does get pushback from historians, especially today in the 21st century. A lot of early histories of the American Civil War greatly hammered Grant for making that June 3rd assault and really just talk about the June 3rd attack. So tonight's stream, I try to put emphasis on the May 31st, June 1st actions. I personally feel those are the key actions of Cold Harbor, especially the June 1st, 6th, and 18th Corps attack. That kind of sets the tempo of everything to come. It's an omen that maybe we shouldn't be fighting here type deal. Maybe this isn't a good idea. An omen that wasn't necessarily saw at the day it happened, but now with historical hindsight, we can see, yeah, that was a warning that this is not a good idea for the Union Army to fight here. But in any case, that's history. And it's a fascinating story. And I hope you guys enjoyed this, just diving into the Overland Campaign and really just going to see this. I was surprised when we started this. The Overland Campaign is pretty well talked about amongst American Civil War historians, but in the general public, it's not really well known about. I know a few people that were in the chat tonight that I would talk about, hey, I'm talking about the Overland Campaign tonight. Be sure to tune in. And they would go, what's the Overland Campaign? And I'm like, well, it was this big military operation in 1864. And most people go, oh, all I know about the Civil War is Gettysburg in 1863. There's this whole other campaign. There's a whole freaking war to delve into with multiple campaigns and multiple feeders. The Overland Campaign, it just has all the big players coming to blows. Grant and Lee finally engage in each other and the horrors that result from that. And the ghost of Howard's right arm puts it, Lee leaves a trail of bodies everywhere he goes. Indeed, he does. And I think something else I heard from one of the American Battlefield Trust videos, the park rangers that were at Cold Harbor argued the reason Grant gets so much slander for June the 3rd, that everybody's saying how he's a butcher and look what he did, and this is such a senseless attack. In retrospect, yes, it's senseless. And even Grant himself admitted, like, yeah, probably I didn't have all the pieces put together that day. Probably shouldn't have done that. But a lot of these newspapers at the time hyped up Cold Harbor as being this big, dramatic defeat. But if you look at the numbers, let me go back quickly. I said it was going to end 5 minutes ago. I had to end prematurely. I'm going to get there. Look at the numbers here for Cold Harbor. I mean, that's a tragic number, and that is an image to the right of the Cold Harbor National Cemetery where Union dead from this battle as well as Gaines Mills are buried. But those are relatively small compared to what we saw at Spotsylvania in the Wilderness. Spotsylvania and the Wilderness are the far more devastating battles in terms of numbers, sheer numbers. Cold Harbor is far more small compared to it. But since the Republican National Convention was getting ready to convene at the time this battle was occurring, and the Lincoln administration was a little bit on the ropes at this time, opponents of Lincoln, when they hear this word that Grant has not been able to break through Richmond yet, oh, he's killing everybody. Look, this is hopeless. This war's never going to end. We must sue for peace with the Confederacy. So, yeah, it feels like some of the propaganda has seeped in over the years from 1864 to 2024. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your evening.